America has the most millionaires of any country in the world, but we have twice as large a percentage that have a net worth under 10,000. If I wanted to change our financial system, you had to be on Wall Street in New York. The democratization of that is alive and well today.
Do you think that the American dream is still alive?
If you have a good idea and you work hard and have perseverance, you have a chance to rise up. What we found in education often, investing early is a key element. So many people that have been financially successful are too busy to invest in their kids.
How do we cultivate the next generation to think like positive disruptors, to think differently? Michael Milken, it is such a pleasure to have you in here today. I want to start by saying that I've been trying to calculate whether your impact on our society has been greater thanks to your work in the for-profit world and capital markets, or was it through your work in the nonprofit world? And I actually think I've come to a conclusion that the transformative impact you had on America and possibly even the world has really been through your capital markets for-profit vision and innovation. But I'll let you make a remark on that, and maybe people by the end of this interview can make their own decision.
Well, I think most people don't realize what the world was like in the 1960s. Maybe there were 10 organizations, financial firms that could decide whether you would get access to capital or not, whether someone would fund your idea. If you go Google, my guess, who invented air conditioning? Generally, you'll have Mr. Carrier show up, 1906. But there was a doctor in the 1850s that had this idea of cooling an operating room to get better results for his patients. And he ran around for almost 20 years, and no one would loan him money. So 55 years later, someone was given credit. And I would say today, it would be quite surprising to young people, but the hardest technology industry I ever financed that no one believed in was your mobile phone and your cell phone. They couldn't understand why you needed them. We had service, you had a telephone, etc., and no one believed in it. And if you wanted the rights to Los Angeles, all of Los Angeles, it cost $10,000 for your application to be the carrier provider for Los Angeles. And so today we have tens of thousands of people that can make the decision whether they believe in you, whether they believe in their ideas. But back then there was very few.
Give us a little lesson in financial literacy. Why did your vision really increase the financial pie that America has access to? Because people think about money and the economy as a zero-sum game. And so if you're going to get richer, I must get poorer. But you went into this world realizing that you can just increase the pie so everybody can have more, which is why my point was that you did so much more for the world by increasing that pie because millions of people got jobs. Can you explain the basics for how capital markets work?
So my world changed on August 11th, 1965. So a little more than 60 years ago. And there was something that happened in Los Angeles called the Watts riots. And I was home from Berkeley because my plan was to run the space program. And I went to Berkeley. And that night, on August 11th, our city was on fire. The city of dreams, the city where the entertainment industry, a city where I used to go to South Central with my dad to visit clients, and I couldn't understand what occurred. Now, I didn't go on August 11th because my dad told me if I left the house, he hoped I would inherit a lot of money because they wouldn't be paying for me to go back to school. So I waited till the next day, August 12th, and said, I'm going to the grocery store, and drove, and I came back a few hours later. So I met a young African-American man who told me no one would loan money to his father who had great ideas because of the color of his skin. and he would never have a chance because of the color of his skin. And we were sitting there watching a building that had been burned out where he worked. A child, married, no savings. He didn't cause it to burn, but he watched it. And so it seemed totally irrational. Why would you make a decision on loaning or not loaning money to a person by the color of their skin? So I went back to Berkeley and changed my major to finance, basically, and began to study. And I was 19 years old. And there was this book by a man named Bradford Hickman, that looked at every single loan and bond issued from 1900 to 1944 through the Depression. And I discovered, and his work showed, that the lower the quality, the higher the rate of return, and that the interest spread more than offset the risk. Now, 99.99% of all companies are non-investment grade. So 1/100% are investment grade, and that might be an exaggeration. So everything people said about credit was wrong. People said countries were the best credit, well, countries were the worst credit. They said individuals were better credit than businesses. They were not. And so I went on my own little democratization of capital. I did my credit work at Berkeley. Then I made a decision to go to Wharton to do work on capital structure. And then I went to Wall Street. And I remember I wrote this paper in the early 1970s. One of the newspapers was asking the valedictorians of the business schools why they went there and what they were going to do. And I pointed out that all the kids I was with Berkeley with, they were doing other things. But my view is if I wanted to change our financial system, you had to be on Wall Street in New York. So the democratization of that is alive and well today. All these new ideas, all these companies that are household names today were all non-investment grade names. And obviously, the mobile cell phone in America is ubiquitous, and there's roughly 9 billion of them on the planet. And the largest company at the time was a company called AT&T. And they had 99% market share, but there was this other little company called MCI that had a man named Bill McGowan who saw fiber optics in a different future. And it took me 3 years to get permission from my firm to finance MCI because you would be blackballed. Anyone that gave money to MCI would be blackballed. And AT&T paid the most fees in the country to financial firms. So that decision blackballed the firm. 4 years later, AT&T was broken up, and what people think of as AT&T isn't even AT&T today. It was Southwest Bell, which was one of the 7 parts of AT&T. And in 1993 and 1994, AT&T bought a company I financed, McCall Cellular, to get in the business. So the meek can inherit the world. The new ideas can change the world today. And they've changed every industry that you're involved with, and they've changed our lives. They've changed healthcare. They're changing education. They changed the media. Today, I think they're talking about shutting down a company I had financed and took public, MTV. But streaming on YouTube, you can pull up any song, any music video. And so the idea of MTV 40 years ago, which was a trailblazer, today it's being disintermediated by streaming.
You explained somewhat of the background of high-yield bonds, which is an important financial literacy term that I think most people don't know. Maybe they know it as junk bonds. But can you help define it for people who have heard this term junk bonds and think it's this terrible thing because the word junk is associated with something negative? And for those who have not had that much access to this kind of financial literacy, what a better person than you to explain it?
Well, 90% of everyone in America, if they sold bonds, they would be junk bonds. And so this issue of what is investment, now they were called high yield, I called them high performance. That's what a junk bond is. Issuers pay higher interest to attract investors. But beginning in the mid-1980s, the people that had high ratings tried to deny capital to the people, the growing firms. In 1985 alone, I think there were 30 to 40 bills introduced in Congress to ban the deductibility of interest if you weren't investment grade. Mm-hmm. And so you now have a young person with a great idea, whether he was Bill Gates or whether he was Steve Jobs or somebody, and he has more talent than you do. So the only way to compete is to ban them having access to capital. This is not a new idea. When the mercantile class rose up in England, the lords rose up and asked the king, we're going to have to put some barrier for them because they're more successful, have better ideas. If you look at the last 30 years of the 20th century, small and medium businesses created 62 million jobs, and large investment-grade companies created -4. So now you were in competition. Bill McGowan, who had better ideas, wasn't a threat until someone actually would give him money to pay for fiber optics cable, install it, or Craig McCall, Bellevue on cellular, was not a threat until someone gave him money to build out a cellular system. Cable networks that many people are connected to today, that you get your fast-speed internet on, until someone loaned them money, they weren't a threat to AT&T at that time. So it's not unusual. When Uber and Lyft got started, the people tried to ban them, and it was going to hurt the taxis and other areas. And it's just occurred in England when the automobile started. The horse-drawn carriages tried to pass rules. You couldn't have these cars. They were dangerous on the street.
Yeah.
And now, in the next decade, when driverless cars are all over the place, I'm sure there's places that are going to try to ban that you can't have a car driving around without a driver in it. So the desire to restrict, I think what most people don't understand is when they get a mortgage or they get a credit card, they don't understand that there's significant risk. Someone isn't making them a mortgage. Whoever made the mortgage then pools that mortgage with thousands or millions of mortgages. And so the risk is spread over numerous people. So you're able to get a mortgage at a lower rate because they're not judging just your risk. You're one of 1,000 or 10,000 loans they make. Credit cards have high default rates, why they have high interest rates. And so this is the challenge. But today, something called the securitization has occurred. Automobile loans, credit card loans, home loans, every one of these, they're sold in packages from this standpoint. And one of the greatest risks that people don't realize is interest rate risk. We had 3 or 4 great institutions go out of business a couple years ago. Republic Bank, headquartered here in California, Silicon Valley Bank, headed here in California, 2 great franchises. What is the mistake they made? Republic Bank loaned money to their depositors at a fixed rate. And in 2021, you could borrow at 2.5%, 2.75%, get a mortgage at 3%. U.S. government sold 30-year bonds at 1.25%. Well, interest rates went up, and the U.S. government bonds sold at 50 cents on the dollar a couple years later. So you lost half your money in the U.S. government bonds. It wasn't that it was riskier as interest rates. And so all those people in America that got 3% loans today, who's on the other side? Who owns all those loans? Well, those loans are not worth 100 cents a dollar, even if you're a good credit, because of the interest rate. And so what did Silicon Valley Bank do wrong? They bought U.S. government bonds, 7-year intermediate bonds, and they bought more than 200 billion of them. And when they went down, they wiped out all the equity. What better place to have been a financial institution in the last 30 years but in Silicon Valley? But they made a mistake not understanding the risk of interest rates.
Well, you talk about the interest rate risk. What about the national debt and the interest rate on the national debt? And what are we leaving our kids with?
Well, what we're leaving them with, because most debts, due to inflation, decrease over time. So if you're going to have significant debt at a country, you also run the risk of significant inflation. People don't really realize what America is worth. We are a unique country in the world. And we are looked at, this ideal of the American dream. People in America don't realize that it is honored and cherished more than the rest of the world, particularly Southeast Asia, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, than it is here in America. The lowest is in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is that ideal? That ideal and the promise is the ideal that you can rise up based on your ability, that there is some place in the world that you can go. And it's not whether you're a man or a woman. It's not your religion. It's not who your parents are and not where you went to school. But if you have a good idea and you work hard and have perseverance, you have a chance to rise up. And that's the ideal. And whether you're in South Africa or Vietnam, the idea that there's some place in the world that exists that has that ideal. So I would call that social capital. And America has benefited for 2 centuries of the best and brightest coming to America today for the best opportunities. And so the most valuable company in the world today is a company called NVIDIA. You might see the name on the news. It was just a few days ago. The value went over $5 trillion. Well, who founded that company? Whose idea was it? It was a young man from Taiwan. And he came to America because he thought he had the best chance. So we are a country of immigrants. And this social capital, the movement, it is estimated that the human capital, the potential of individuals, and the social capital, rule of law, access to education, healthcare, is worth between 1,500 and 2,000 trillion. So that's 6 times or more the financial assets, and that's 50 times or more the size of our economy. So we have benefited in many ways from the view that people around the world have. They have the best chance here.
Do you think that the American dream is still alive? People are very upset with our medical industry. They're very upset with our education industry. They're upset with the opportunity, the economy, the national debt. And so constantly you're hearing everywhere you go, especially on social media, that the American dream is no longer and that people are migrating to other countries or are feeling despair that they can't, in fact, make it in America anymore.
My guess is if they could, 800 million people would come to America if they thought they could, okay, if there was proper immigration today. About 1/3 of people in America think they've achieved their American dream. Now, the person that's most upset is the media, okay? So
because they love being upset about everything?
Right, okay. I once had a lawyer once tell me, why do people read the sports section in a paper? This is when people used to read newspapers. Because something good happened. Someone did something great. Okay? Might not have been your team, but someone did something great. what happens on the front page? It's generally all bad news. It's terrible, etc. So no matter how many times they tell you or how many bots from China unleash 200,000 telling you how terrible it is, you just got to stay positive. What you see, and we have now filmed 4,000 people on the way to 10,000. The studies show, Archbridge Institute, latest published study, June of 2025, 1/3 of the people feel they've achieved their American dream. It might be coaching their daughter's soccer team. The media is so infatuated with the lives of the rich and famous that they've made people think that that is the American dream. It's not. And so about 1/3 think they're on the way, and 1/3 think they're not going to make it. So when you quiz people now for the last 12 years, what is the essential thing for the American dream? Number one response is freedom. Freedom to live your life. The number two response is a good family life. The number three is safety and retirement. So financial does kick in. If you ask them, is wealth essential for the American dream? The last surveys show the lowest 16%, that wealth is the required for the American dream. And so, yes, the media portrays that it's dead, but when we interview people, I would say 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 start shedding tears, thinking about what they overcame in their life, what their parents overcame, their grandparents, their great-grandparents. And we filmed people who did not come to America, their ancestors, by choice. They came here as slaves. But when we're filming the 5th or 6th generation, today, they've risen up. And so, yes, we don't have economic mobility to the level we should, and that's why we have a big program called the Economic Mobility Alliance. And people might be aware, something we worked on for a few years, Invest in America accounts, that starting next year in America, every single person born will be given $1,000 in a savings account. No fees, no charges, and it'll compound during that time. In addition to that, employers of 30 million Americans have said that they will give money to these accounts also for every child, not those born, every child of an employee. And there's one individual and a group of individuals that have now pledged to give billions of dollars when these accounts are set up. So yes, we're going to try to see what it's like. And there's a lot of studies, you might be familiar with them, that show if you have money in a savings account, you're less likely to commit crimes and other issues.
You mentioned compound interest, and you mentioned the $1,000 that's going to go into these kids' accounts. But can you just give a picture of what this could mean in 20 years from now with compound interest for these kids?
Well, the first, if they invest in the S&P 500, which is the plan, and no fees, you should have 8 times your money on the first dollar you put in. But they're talking about no taxes, that parents, relatives will put money in these accounts. Strangers like me can put money in the kids in the neighborhood's accounts, and employers can put in. So if you want to look in the world today of what country has the highest median net worth in the world that has 20 million people, it's Australia. Australia created these superannuation accounts. And so it's savings, and you can't take the money out till you retire. But today, for 26 or 27 million people in Australia, there's $3 trillion in these accounts. So Australians have a median net worth substantially higher than the United States today. And so these type of things are coming to America.
You talked a little bit about the Center for the American Dream, which is where you videoed all of these entrepreneurs that have made it. And I think it's very interesting as we
Not
talk
entrepreneurs, just the local soccer coach, okay? The
Americans
mom
that
who
made
has
it.
4 kids. Okay, but we've also filmed those that think they're on their way.
Yeah.
And we've also filmed those that don't know if they're going to achieve their dream. So we're not excluding any group today.
Do you think it's a form of an inoculation against the Chinese bots that are trying to convince Americans that it's doom and gloom in America? Well, you go on TikTok, you see all these videos about how it's terrible to live here. And as you walk through the Center for the American Dream, you see that it's wonderful to live here. And so is that what we basically need to do in order to protect our youth against this doom and gloom, America is down attack that's on us?
Well, let's step back. There aren't a lot of people lined up to go to North Korea. There aren't a lot of people lined up to go to China. They're not lined up to go to Russia. And they're not lined up to go to Iran. Let's just start with those 4. All 4 of them are sophisticated in the internet and technology today. And so there was a study that showed 60% of everyone worth $1 million in China wanted to leave. What type of country can you not take your money out? What kind of country can you not leave? Okay, if we said you can't leave California, people would be quite concerned. And so, therefore, if you were the head of that country, and you start to think about some of your challenges, 1, your birth rate's gone from having 30 million kids a year to 9. So if life expectancy goes to 80 times 9, your population is going to be 700 million. So you're going to lose half your population in the next 100. They're going to disappear. Number 2, you now have the most people with diabetes. No one used to have diabetes because you've changed what they eat. 21,000 fast food restaurants focused on carbs, animal protein, and sugar when you used to be on a plant-based diet. So you have a lot of challenges. Therefore, for your own citizens, you have to paint a very negative picture of the United States. Okay, you don't want people to want to go there. And therefore, you're going to try to shut down access to the internet or other things where they could see a different story. So yes, this is a challenge in the world we live in today. And with technology, today they could project your face on anything. So it isn't just, you can have you say anything, right?
Yeah. Well, so many of the videos that you're seeing online are trying to create a fraction and envy between those who have succeeded and those who could succeed. And so rather than portraying the message that, you try to portray through some of your philanthropy that, if you just keep going at it, if you actually have discernment of actually what makes you happy, right? You can be happy. The videos that we're seeing on the internet, specifically targeting young people, is this constant envious mentality of blaming the other. And a perfect example is the hatred and vitriol that is being created towards somebody like Elon Musk. Elon Musk has also, in his ways, increase the pie for Americans. I mean, we all benefit from so many of the things that he has done. But what you're seeing, the combination of these bots online and the media that just loves to, show negativity and bad news, there is this constant attack really on the American dream as they attack those who've succeeded rather than lift those who've succeeded and turn them into role models. So kids look at them and say, hey, Michael, how did you do that? What was it that you told yourself every day to keep going and really encourage other people to do the same rather than just be envious?
I think the reason we built this Center for Advancing the American Dream across from the White House and the Treasury was precisely that. We wanted to have a shining light, not just to people in this country, to the world, that it existed, and what better place to put it from that standpoint. But there are challenges. America has the most millionaires of any country in the world. But we have twice as large a percentage that have a net worth under 10,000. So if you don't have an education and you don't have skills, it's hard in a knowledge-based society today. And so much of our activity at this Economic Mobility Alliance has been to try to raise people up. So Invest in America is just one idea. Another group that's constantly under attack, private equity. So there are more companies in America controlled by private equity than are public. Led by 3 firms, they launched something called Ownership Works. So when they buy a company, they pledge to give every single person at that company, even the person who's the night watchman, stock in the company. So 100% of all employees and billions, maybe more than $10 billion has been distributed to all of these lower wage workers. So there are initiatives today on how do we raise the bottom 20, 30% of the people and get them to feel that they're part. And when we look at the focus groups that have left the center for advancing the American dream, we see 2 things. One, they leave with more hope. That was our first goal. Come and find your dream in someone else's story, someone like you. And number 2, they leave that they're going to have to take on more responsibility because they might have blamed it that they didn't know their dad. Now they've met 4 stories of people that didn't know their dad, what they did, and buckled up. Today in America, your zip code determines your upward mobility and determines the length of your life in terms of access to healthcare. So we have to make a lot of changes. And once these studies come out and you look at a city where the chance to rise up is very high, let's say Salt Lake. If you were born in the lowest socioeconomic, your probability of rising to the highest was substantially higher than some cities in the Southeast. And so you look at those cities and try to figure out how you can change them. But the American dream is evolving. The free enterprise system is evolving today. And so there isn't a better system. And what we need to do is evolve to make sure everyone feels they have a chance. And I think that's what's driven me for 70 years. My father told me when I was 8 years old that his grandchildren wouldn't have a great life unless everyone felt they had a chance. Okay, I was a star basketball player when I was 13 or 14, but I never grew another inch. And so I went from star basketball player to the bench to the stands. Okay, that wasn't going to be my career. And so I think everyone has to rethink about what is their dream. And when you look at the number one thing, it's freedom. A lot of people here in our country don't realize, and therefore many of the immigrants that come here understand what it means to be free. Number 2, understanding the importance of a good family life. So when people saw Magic Johnson play basketball, one of the greatest players, also a smile on his face, lights up a room. What they didn't see is that he was one of 10 kids. They were poor. And his mother had them take their food to neighbors that were even poorer than him. So he didn't grow up with a silver spoon in his mouth. And he has risen up. And just think about it. He got HIV and they told him he could no longer play basketball. He could no longer do what he was on the best in the world at. Okay? And when you see him today, due to medical advances, he's alive and well. He's become very successful as a philanthropist, a businessman, investing in insurance and sports. So he had to give up what was the dream because of his health and his condition. But medical research has given him, another 30, 40 years and maybe another 50 years. So if he can rise up, we all can rise up.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. I think of your attitude about things and your focus on education, and I think about something that we say here all the time, and that is education got us into this mess. Education's going to have to get us out of this mess. And I think America's education system is a mess. We have unbelievable DNA in America, incredibly bright kids. We spend a fortune on them, oftentimes more than $24,000 per kid in most government schools. Yet we're seeing a decrease in literacy rate, numeracy rate. I mean, they barely know civics, let alone expecting them to know basic financial literacy, what you explained. What is your view of America's education system, and can it be fixed?
There's going to be a dramatic change with technology. But let's start back. In 1983, I believe, there was this report called A Nation at Risk.
Yeah.
CEOs, philanthropists, government leaders did this study. And what was the conclusion? If a foreign power had enforced this educational system on America, we would have a revolution, okay? It was updated 40 years later, and it's still the same. So if you say, to me, when did the change occur? The change began to occur in the 1970s. The country didn't fully realize that for 100 years, we were educated by the most talented women in our country. So the opportunities for women were limited. And so by 1960, the United States was the most educated country in the world by 2 years. And if you looked in the 50s and 60s and said, what was the number one job of women that graduated in the top 15% of the college class, it was teacher. But emancipation came in parts in the 60s and the 70s. And I remember I was working as a consultant for an accounting firm in between semesters in the 60s. And when I left them in the mid-60s, I told them, the smartest person working for your firm in this country is this woman manager. Why is she not a partner? And the person who ran it looked at me like I'm crazy. We don't have any women partners. Well, that was America then. And if we would have told you in 1960s that a woman would be the CEO of General Motors, the largest car company, or the CEO of the largest defense contractor, Lockheed, or the CEO of IBM, they would have said you were crazy. But when those opportunities opened up, we never fully realized that we had to adjust compensation. We had to adjust the way it goes so we could attract the best and brightest to work in teachers. Singapore attracts the best and brightest to be their teachers in Singapore. And they ranked number one in the world in education. So we never fully adjusted. And so we are fooling our kids and letting them down because of grade inflation. There are districts now you cannot give a D or an F because it's not fair. And therefore, they have high grades. There are schools that if you didn't attack a teacher, you probably have perfect grades, but they're not a question of learning. And there's some schools in the Chicago area where not one child is reading at grade level. And in New York, I'm assuming it's somewhere in the 30 to 40% are at grade level in math and English. So we understand this. We wrote about it 40 years ago. My own family has launched all these programs over these 40 years, trying to recognize the best teachers, etc., or other things. And so we have not been successful, and I don't have to tell you, the teachers union is a very powerful force, one of the largest contributors to political campaigns. And the person who was just elected mayor has vowed no more charter schools. And the two schools in New York City, and their scores, and they've done substantially better than the public schools, and most of their kids are minority kids. So who's going to be penalized? The minority kids in New York City. And He's talked about eliminating the test requirements to get into the two leading science high schools. If you look at the National Academy of Sciences today, I believe those two schools have had the most members of any two high schools in the country. So now we're going to denigrate those schools. And so we could say, well, gosh, if the 90th percentile in math in the U.S. is the 35th percentile in South Korea, we're fooling our kids to think they're going to perform at world levels. And so in year, I think it was 2000, John Chambers was the head of Cisco. It was the most valuable company in the world at that time. And he gave this statement that education is going to make everything else on the internet look like a rounding error. Well, it hasn't. Okay, but we have a chance that it will. And why? If we can find someone that can create technology that can find the location of 9 billion cell phones on the planet, or someday direct 100 million cars of whether to turn left or right, or those little guys traveling around delivering your food, those little robots, if they can direct them, then I'm assuming we can create a teacher, AI teacher, for every person on the planet. There are more phones than people. So they can be your tutor, your friend. They know how you learn. They can test. They can give you quizzes. And if you missing them, they'll make them easier until you learn them. So eventually, we're going to be able to let every student have access to knowledge and have their little coach, maybe their little Jiminy Cricket on their shoulder. But I think there are people that have made that decision. Joe Lamont, who founded Trilogy Software this year, left his firm to found Alpha Schools. And so he's going to try to deliver that to you. And the people that built Epic Games that has 600 million players, they've left to build educational games so you can play these games and try to get you the same techniques they gave you to learn to play their game. Now you're going to be learning as a byproduct of playing the game. So I think technology affords us that opportunity. But there was a movie a number of years ago that came out, Waiting for Superman.
Yeah.
And the movie talked about lottery to get into the schools in Washington, D.C. or New York. And a good friend of mine did it, Jeff Skoll. And I took this movie and showed it to a number of people. And the reactions were very interesting. For many people, they were embarrassed. They had no knowledge of how important it was to win the lottery. And that if the kid didn't win the lottery, their chances in life were going to decrease dramatically. And it was interesting, and particularly many of lower socioeconomic parents' reaction was, it's not fair. If we all can't go to the schools, then no one should go. In other words, the idea that the next door neighbor's child could go to the school and their kids can't because of a lottery didn't seem fair. So you have some cities in America today where only 50% of the kids go to the public school system and so on. But everyone who's willing to compete, the schools and the other schools should raise the level of the public schools, right? If you have choice in the state of Texas now, you have choice. The money goes with the child. So whatever they're paying can go. You can pick a different school and the money can be used there. So it's 20 years, maybe it's 40 years too late. But I think a lot of the people that have worked in technology, et cetera, today, who now have kids, are focused on what they can do for education.
So much to unpack there. I'm sure we'll end up having probably another hour, just you and I talking about education. And you mentioned all kinds of things. And I'm sure my audience is reacting in two ways. Some of them are excited about technology and the prospect of sidelining some of these government schools that have been held hostage by the unions, and we have not been able to see enough progress there. And another part of the audience is probably very much scared of the word AI. I'm not sure that they're so scared of technology, but people are very nervous about AI. Who manipulates the AI? Who puts the content into whether it's the learning systems. I did do a full interview with Mackenzie Price, who runs the Alpha Schools, and we talked a little bit about the mechanism of how some of these new AI systems can educate a child at the pace that the child is willing and able to handle. But people are very nervous about AI. I mean, they're nervous about teachers being replaced, especially the image of a little robot teaching a child versus a human. And so what is your remark on people's fear of the use of AI in the education world? This is especially where I think people are very nervous. Innovation in education. On the one hand, you have parents really wanting to see innovation. On the other hand, when you bring in these new, scary, big things, people get very nervous.
Well, first, I want to make a statement. There are great public schools in this country. So when we talk about them, they vary greatly.
Sure.
It started in the Milken Family Foundation and spun out 20 years ago. My brother Lowell has built the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching. And they go into school districts with rubrics. And whether it's Mississippi or whether it's Tennessee, they have risen up. And so there is a number of public school systems in America that are great. And you see these changes. So it changes based on part. Yes, we're all scared of change and AI. Can they all be like Spock? Can he all be good? Okay, in Star Trek, we were dependent on his wisdom, but he was good. Can we program them for only good, not bad? Okay, and so, yes, it's scary. The idea that someone could come in, but we're evolving. And you mentioned Elon Musk, and I'm thinking back, I've done a number of interviews with Elon over the years, and when I went to work in the late 60s for this financial firm, every elevator had an elevator operator. So what did Elon say that has stuck with me to today? He asked me, when I go in an elevator, am I nervous because there's no elevator operator? And if I push a button, do I have confidence that it'll take me to the 25th floor? Or am I nervous where we're going to go? We're going to go fly out of the building? What's going to happen to this elevator? And so we're comfortable in the elevator. And so I was in Chicago at this meeting a couple years ago, and I arrived late. And they were just discussing, they were talking about what is the weak link in the transportation system. So I'm listening, and after about 15 minutes, they keep talking about the weak link, and I have to ask a question. I told them I apologize. I arrived late, but I don't know what the weak link is. And everyone looked at me like I was out of my mind. How dumb can you be? The weak link is the human being. The human being has to go to the bathroom. The human being has to eat. The human being has to sleep. The human being can be distracted by something they see. Okay? We've got to eliminate in our transportation system the human being. Okay? So when Elon said this, that we're going to have driverless cars to me, he made this analogy to the elevator. Okay, yes, AI is scary. But I don't ever think when I'm in an elevator and I push a button that it's not going to go to where I want it to go.
Yeah.
Okay?
That's a good answer.
And I think someday the cars will do a better job. The other day, I was walking on a street, and it was a very narrow street, and he had one of those little short guys who delivers food. I don't remember what they're called, that you see. And he's coming towards me. I'm going to them. And I'm trying to figure out here, there's barely room for one person to walk. What is this little device going to do? And all of a sudden it starts backing up and letting me go by. Okay, so someone programmed it not just to go to deliver it to this address and know how to cross the street and whether it's a red light or a green light. But here, someone programmed, if it sees a human being and it's a narrow place, to back up and let the human being go by. So it's a concern, and we will not solve it, and I'm sure there'll be many things that go wrong. But in the long run, will the nanny be a robot 20 years ago, from 20 years from now, or 30 years from now? And that's why I keep thinking about that there's no elevator operators for the most part today.
I'm preoccupied with how to raise good, happy children. And I listen to the way you describe things, the way you think about things. You think about things differently. So does Elon Musk and other people who have made it. What advice would you give to a parent like me so that we can raise kids to be discerning, to have perspective, to look at things differently, right? It's that people draw these two dots and say, draw a line between the two dots. And people like you are like, wait a second, I'm just going to fold the paper and I'm going to stick the pen through. And that's how I'm going to get there, right? You're troublemakers. You are a troublemaker in the financial industry. Hopefully, God willing, you create enough trouble in our education system so we can get out of this mess. How do we do this? How do we cultivate the next generation to think like positive disruptors, to think differently?
So when you say make it, I'm evolving, okay? I think differently today than I did 10 or 20 or 30, 40 years ago. I've absorbed all this to make these decisions. And the same thing's going on in healthcare. I would say healthcare is changing faster than education today. The idea that AI can diagnose you better than a doctor, are people going to accept that in the future? But these studies have already occurred here at UCSF in San Francisco in the diagnosis. But let's come back here. I gave a talk at the family offices in Mexico City last week. And they thought I was going to talk about economics and finance and financial literacy and how important it was. I did not spend 1 second. I talked about, so you are representing some wealthy family in their family office today. So what's important? People tell you that number 2 thing that's important is a good family life. So when I was younger, they had this ad from Fram oil filters and says you can pay now or you can pay later. And when later, it's much more expensive. So what have we learned in education? We know that the most imperative time, most important, is 0 to 6. By the time they're 15, you have to invest 5 times as much to get the same output as if they were 5. And if you wait till they're 25, you have to invest 10 times as much. So early is the best investment. Now, what about a parent? Are you going to invest in your kids when they're young? Are you going to hug them? Are you going to talk to them? Are you going to let them know that they have a strong family life? Magic Johnson came from a single parent household, but he was given confidence and love to go out and take chances, okay? So to me, I gave a 1-hour talk on investing in your children, okay? So many people that have been financially successful are too busy to invest in their kids. They're going here, they're going there, okay? And they're going to, best of luck, etc. And so what we found in education often is a 2-parent household that like each other enough to foster a positive environment for their child. If you get self-confidence at a young age, you're going to be much different. You know, I, with my own employees, always used to look, do they have something outside the job? Does somebody love them? Does someone care about them? If they are, they're not going to be looking for something at work. They're going to be a better employee. They're going to come up with ideas. They're going to try new things. And they're not going to be depressed if someone says no or it doesn't work.
They'll have perspective.
And so my feeling is that wealth is not equal to happiness. The media might tell you that, but it's not. And so I have friends that have been very financially successful who never had a good day. And if you're defined as you're only as happy as your least happy child, investing early is a key element. We all have bumps in the road. We all have things that didn't go right in our life. Are you resilient? Can you pick up the pieces and go on? And that's why I gave you that Magic Johnson analogy. He couldn't play basketball. He'd been doing that. He was one of the best in the world, and now they told him he has to go do something else. He can't do this anymore. And so many athletes, I think in professional football, the average career is less than 4 years. Well, what are you prepared for? Because you might be 26 years old or 27 and your career's over. Well, what are you going to do?
Yeah, Magic Johnson didn't just reject defeat on the court, but he rejected being defeated in life.
And I assure you, his mother played a large role in him being able to do that. And so I think for you, hug your kids, okay, talk about things, spend time with them. I find when my own children were young, going on family trips is fantastic. My daughter, I don't remember if she was at the time 7 or 8. We were in Venice on a family trip. It was all planned. Her 2 older brothers, my wife who I met in middle school, myself, and her. And she saw a cat. And she wanted to follow the cat. So whatever we had planned, my wife Lori and my 2 boys went off on our trip, and I followed this cat with my daughter. And I saw what Venice looked like from 3 feet or 3.5 feet high. Okay. And so it was a totally different experience, up and down little bridges. Wherever this cat went, we went for 2 hours. So seeing the world through your children's eyes, to me, is very important. You know, the great thing about early childhood and before they're 6 is they don't have a lot of defense mechanisms. So they tell you what they think, what happened, exciting, etc. And most kids that are young, until we have an environment that beats the freedom out of them and the creativity out of them, are all the same.
I love that you talk about it because so many young people are delaying getting married. They don't want to have children. And here you and I sit here and we share something in common, and that is our greatest joy is our family and our children. And this is the American dream, and it is within reach, and it's something that people can just go ahead and make for themselves. And it's tragic that young people don't realize what a gift it is to build a family. It's tragic.
And I always tell people that grandchildren are better than you think they are. Whatever you think, it's going to be better. Yeah. And I do think when you're inundated every day that we're all going to die from climate change, and this is terrible and that's terrible. When I see someone put out a statistic that the number 1 cause of death for teenage girls is suicide, you can just imagine what's occurred. Okay? And that's why it's important to make sure you know your kids and make sure they know you care about them.
Michael, if you had a chance to show this interview to 17-year-old Michael Milken, how do you think 17-year-old Michael Milken would react?
I think he'd be positive. By 17, I was well on the way.
You were a man, I'm assuming, by almost a man.
When I was 11, I wrote a letter to the president telling him I was ready to run the space program, okay? I didn't tell him I was 11. But I told him I had been reading comic books. I never missed a math or science program, etc. But I never got a response. So Sputnik had an enormous effect. I don't think people realize the importance of being a baby boomer, those born after World War II, and the fact that my parents, which were described as the most caring generation, those that lived through the Depression and World War II, told us we could be anything we wanted to be. Third generation could not. They lived through a depression. They were dependent on the government for survival. They were dependent on the government for protection in a World War II. Now this group could go out and dream. Today, you have a much different world than the world I grew up in. And so, to me, you have a lot of people that have been narrowed into a particular area rather than a generalist opportunity. The percentage of two-parent families is a lot lower today than it was when I grew up in the Happy Days. The show was Happy Days. Father Knows Best. All of those shows. I rode my bike to a neighborhood school. Everyone on the street knew who I was, okay? Today, kids, you don't know what schools they're going to. The kid across the street might be going to one school and the one next door might be going to another. So you've done a lot of damage to the neighborhood school.
Yeah.
And so as we've taken away the sense of a neighborhood, we have to find out what we're going to provide to bring it back in different ways.
Well, Mike, I'll end with this by saying you really surprised me, because I thought that I would ask you these questions and you would say, well, have them study more math, or, make sure that they're resilient. And really, ultimately, your answer is the answer that I give as a mom and as an educator. And that is, focus on the family, focus on love, focus on your soul. And once you focus on those things, the rest of the world will just work out.
Well, and have some self-initiative. But if you have a strong family that you can rely on, there's no place you can't go.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you. And I look forward to doing a deeper dive into the medical world. I appreciate it.
Okay. Good to see you.